Every morning, long before the ticket booths opened, before the sun had even climbed above the tree line, Boba was already working. The silverback gorilla would cross his enclosure in the pale gray light, grip the rim of a heavy black rubber tire, and drag it across the grass. Then another, and another. By 8 o'clock, he'd be stacking them, carefully, deliberately. Most of the keepers smiled when they saw it. Gorillas are intelligent, they invent games, they get fixated on objects. This, they assumed, was just Boba being Boba. But one keeper didn't smile. Her name was Angie. She was new, but she knew what grief looked like, and what she observed in Boba made her stomach turn. It wasn't the stacking itself, it was the precision. Boba would lift each tire, rotate it slightly, and set it into position. He worked like someone following a blueprint that no one else could see. 2 vertical columns, a curved piece across the top. That didn't look like play, it looked like a memory. And within a few weeks, Angie would uncover a secret the zoo had kept buried for 20 years. A secret that was about to break her heart. Over the next few weeks, Angie became Boba's shadow. She logged his routine. She sketched his tire formations. She noticed that no matter where the staff hid the tires overnight, Boba would drag every single one back to the exact same patch of dirt. Other gorillas had learned not to go near it. If they did, Boba would rise to his full height and let out a low, rumbling warning. "This is mine. Stay back." When Angie brought her concerns to the senior staff, they laughed it off. "He's running a tire shop," one joked, but Angie asked a harder question. "Has anyone ever tried taking the tires away?" The room went quiet. They decided to run the test. The next morning, before Boba woke up, keepers removed every single tire from the yard. When Boba emerged, his reaction was instant. He panicked. He paced the bare dirt. He grunted in short, sharp gasps, peering into corners like the tires might be hiding. For 3 hours, he refused his food. He refused his toys. He just stood over that empty patch of ground like a man visiting a grave. When the staff finally returned the tires at midday, Boba immediately calmed down. He picked one up, placed it in the dirt, and the ritual resumed. In her notebook, Angie wrote one word and circled it twice. Why? Soon, Boba's tire towers became a viral spectacle. Visitors crowded the glass, but behind the scenes, things were deteriorating. Boba's protectiveness was turning into violent aggression. He slammed the glass when maintenance workers got too close to his tower. The zoo director called Angie into his office. He wasn't an evil man, just a corporate one. He looked at the bottom line. "Visitor safety is non-negotiable," he told her. "If Boba keeps escalating, the board will transfer him to an isolated facility." Angie felt the floor drop. Isolated facility meant a concrete cell. It meant the end of Boba's life as he knew it. "How long?" she asked. "Weeks," the director replied. "If you're invested in Boba's story, take 1 second to hit the subscribe button." Stories like this take time to uncover, and what Angie finds next changes everything. Angie had weeks to save him. She brought in an animal psychologist who sat outside Boba's enclosure for 6 hours. When the doctor finally spoke, his words sent chills down Angie's spine. "Animals build things to cope," the doctor said. "With loss, it becomes an anchor. I think Boba is trying to tell you something, and I think it happened a long time ago." Angie went digging. She bypassed the modern digital files and went straight to the basement archives. The dusty, forgotten boxes from the late 1990s. Tucked behind a rusted filing cabinet, she found a plastic bin of old VHS-C camcorder tapes, dated 22 years ago. She took a tape to the A-var-V room, digitized the audio, and on an impulse played the grainy metallic sound through the speaker system in Boba's enclosure. Boba froze. The heavy tire he was holding slipped from his hands. His eyes locked onto the corner of the enclosure, the exact spot where he built his towers. And then he made a sound Angie had never heard, a low, sustained rumble deep in his chest. It wasn't anger, it was absolute, crushing heartbreak. He walked over to his unfinished tower, pressed his massive hand flat against the dirt, and laid his head down. Tears streamed down Angie's face. "What did they do to you?" she whispered. The next day, Angie found the missing piece. A set of architectural blueprints from 1999. The blueprints showed Boba's habitat as it used to be. It wasn't one massive open space. It was 2 sections, divided by a thick concrete wall, and right in the center of that wall was a single, narrow doorway. Angie held the blueprint up to the window. The location of that doorway aligned perfectly down to the inch, with the spot where Boba stacked his tires every morning. She looked at her photos of his towers. 2 vertical columns. a curved arch. A chill shot down her spine. Boba wasn't stacking tires, he was rebuilding the door. Every single morning, with nothing but rubber and his own memory, this gorilla was reconstructing the one opening that used to exist in a wall that divided his world. She needed to know who was on the other side. The records had been scrubbed, but the older keepers knew. Angie cornered Gerald, a man who had worked at the zoo for 30 years. "I need to know who was behind that door," Angie demanded. Gerald looked at the floor, his eyes filled with tears of 20-year-old guilt. "Her name was BB," he whispered. The story poured out. 22 years ago, Boba had a mate. They were inseparable, but the zoo ran into severe financial trouble. When BB caught a rare respiratory infection, the current director, who was just a junior manager back then, panicked. They couldn't afford her treatment. So, behind closed doors, they brokered a deal to permanently transfer BB to a wealthier zoo across the country. But they couldn't afford to send Boba. To prepare them for the separation, they built a concrete wall straight through the enclosure. Boba on one side, BB on the other. The only connection they had was a single, tiny staff doorway. Too narrow to pass through, but just wide enough to see through. Just wide enough to touch fingers. They sat on either side of that door for weeks. Gerald cried. They just called to each other. Soft little sounds like they were saying, "I'm still here." Then, in the dead of night, the trucks came. BB was taken. When Boba woke up, his side of the door was empty. He screamed until his voice gave out. He refused to eat. Eventually, the zoo renovated the enclosure, tore down the wall, and buried the history. But Boba never forgot. For 22 years, every single morning, he rebuilt the door, hoping she would walk through it. Angie didn't just go to the director, she went to the press. She leaked the blueprints, the photos, and Gerald's confession. Within 48 hours, it was national news. The public outrage was so massive, the zoo board had no choice. They unanimously voted to reunite them. But there was a massive problem. Boba was now a senior silverback. Sedating and moving a gorilla his age across the country was incredibly dangerous. His heart could stop in transit, but leaving him meant a broken heart anyway. Angie signed the transfer papers. On the morning of the move, Angie arrived at dawn. Boba had already placed the first 2 tires. She put her hand on the glass. "You don't need to build it anymore, buddy." The transport took 2 grueling days. When they finally arrived at the sanctuary in Florida, the tension was unbearable. Would they even remember each other after 2 decades? They placed Boba in an introduction yard, separated from BB by a single mesh fence. Boba was disoriented. He paced nervously. But then, the wind shifted. Boba froze. His nostrils flared. Slowly, he turned his massive head toward the fence. On the other side of the fence, an older female gorilla stood up. She let out a soft, trembling sound. A sound Boba hadn't heard in 22 years. Boba crossed the yard in 3 massive strides. He pressed his face against the metal mesh. BB walked up and pressed her fingers through the chain link. The next day, the keepers opened the gate. For a moment, neither moved. Then Boba stepped through. BB walked up to him and pressed her face directly into his chest. He wrapped his massive arms around her back and closed his eyes. They stood there for 20 minutes, completely silent. In the years that followed, Boba and BB spent every day in the sun, sleeping side by side. And from the moment he walked through that gate, Boba never stacked another tire again. Angie eventually left the zoo, but above her desk, she pinned a photograph of a half-built tire tower. And underneath it, she wrote 3 words he never forgot. Animals feel grief, and they feel love just as deeply as we do. If this story touched your heart, hit the subscribe button and share this video with someone you'd build a door for. I'll see you in the next one.